The rain came down in sheets the day Lillian Norris buried her husband, and the first person she saw through her tears was the one man she had never expected to see again. Frederick James stood at the edge of the mourners, hat in hand, water streaming down the worn leather of his coat. He did not approach during the service. He did not speak when the preacher closed his Bible. He simply waited, as still as the headstones around them, while the other folks from town murmured their condolences and hurried back to their wagons. Lillian felt her knees weaken as the last shovelful of earth struck Thomas's coffin, and her hand instinctively went to the swell of her belly where their child grew. 6 months along now, 6 months carrying a baby whose father would never hold it. Mrs. Norris. Frederick's voice came from behind her, low and careful. She turned, rain mingling with the tears on her cheeks. He stood 3 feet away, an umbrella open in his large, calloused hands. His face looked older than she remembered, weathered by sun and years, but his eyes held the same steady kindness that had drawn her to him when they were both 17. Frederick. Her voice broke on his name. Thought you might need this. He stepped forward and held the umbrella over her head, though he remained half in the rain himself. Ground's getting muddy. Let me walk you to your wagon. She wanted to say she could manage alone. She wanted to tell him to leave, that seeing him here made everything harder. Instead, she nodded and let him fall into step beside her. They walked in silence through the cemetery, past graves marked with simple wooden crosses and newer stones carved with names of settlers who had come to Nebraska territory seeking better lives. Thomas Norris had been one of them. So had she. I heard about Thomas 3 days ago, Frederick said as they reached her wagon. Was working a ranch up near the Platte, rode straight through when I got word. You did not have to come. I know. She looked at him then, really looked at him. He was 30 now, same as her. 11 years had passed since she had chosen Thomas over him. 11 years since she had told Frederick she wanted a man with ambition, with plans for a farm and a future, not a drifter who broke horses for other men's ranches. Thomas had offered her security. Frederick had offered nothing but his heart and his 2 hands. Thank you for coming, she whispered. It means something, even if I do not deserve it. Frederick's jaw tightened. He helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand firm under her elbow. You deserving things was never the question, Lillian. Get yourself home and dry. That baby needs you well. He handed her the umbrella and stepped back. She sat there holding the reins, wanting to say more, but the words tangled in her throat. Finally, she clicked her tongue and the horse started forward, and when she looked back, Frederick was still standing in the rain, watching her go. The Norris farm sat 5 miles outside Snake River, Idaho territory, 160 acres Thomas had claimed under the Homestead Act 4 years ago. They had proven it up just last winter, getting the deed free and clear. Now the land was hers, along with a cabin that needed chinking, a barn that needed repairs, and debts at the general store she was not sure how to pay. She spent the evening sitting by the stove, hands folded over her belly, trying to make sense of numbers in Thomas's ledger. He had been good with figures, careful with money. But there had been the doctor's fees when he fell sick, and the medicine that had not worked, and now the cost of the burial. She had maybe 3 months before the baby came. After that, she did not know how she would manage harvest, or even planting if spring came before she delivered. A knock on the door startled her from her calculations. She opened it to find Frederick on her porch, hat in hand again, a burlap sack over his shoulder. Brought you some things, he said. Flour, beans, salt pork. Figured you might be running low. Frederick, I cannot accept already bought and paid for. No sense letting it go to waste. He set the sack just inside the door. Your fence along the north pastures got a break in it. Saw it on my way out here. I will fix it tomorrow if that is all right with you. Where are you staying? Got a bedroll, barns dry enough. Absolutely not, you will catch your death. She stepped back, gesturing him inside. There's a cot by the stove. You can sleep there tonight, and tomorrow we will talk about all this. He hesitated, then nodded and came in, moving carefully as though afraid to disturb the space. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but she had made it comfortable over the years with rag rugs and curtains she had sewn herself. Thomas's coat still hung by the door. His pipe sat on the mantel. The sight of Frederick standing among these remnants of her married life felt strange and painful and oddly right all at once. I will make coffee, she said. You should rest. I can manage. Frederick, she turned to face him. Why are you here, really? He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Because you should not be alone right now. That is all. Over the next week, Frederick fixed the fence, repaired 3 broken boards on the porch, and mucked out the barn. He worked from dawn until dusk, stopping only when Lillian called him in for meals. They spoke little during those first days. She did not know what to say to him, and he seemed content with silence. But his presence filled the empty spaces in a way that made the grief a little more bearable. On the 8th morning, she woke to find him already outside splitting firewood. She watched from the window as the axe rose and fell, his movements efficient and sure. He had always been strong, built for hard work, and the years had only added muscle to his frame. Thomas had been slighter, quicker with words than with his hands. She had loved that about him once. Now she found herself grateful for Frederick's quiet competence. She made breakfast and set 2 plates on the table. When he came in, she poured him coffee and sat down across from him. We need to discuss this arrangement, she said. All right. I cannot pay you for the work you are doing. Did not ask you to. But it is not right, Frederick. You cannot simply put your life aside to fix my problems. He took a sip of coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. What life would I be putting aside? I hire on for wages, do my work, move to the next job. Been doing that for more than a decade. This is no different. It is different and you know it. Maybe. He set the cup down. But here is what I know for certain. You are 6 months along with a baby, running a farm by yourself, and you need help. I can give that help. Everything else is just noise. People will talk. Let them. She felt tears prick her eyes again, though she could not say if they were from gratitude or grief, or the confusing tangle of feelings that rose every time she looked at him. I chose Thomas. I hurt you. You should hate me. Never could, Frederick said simply. Tried for a while, did not take. They finished breakfast in silence, and then he went back to work. But something had shifted between them, some acknowledgement that they were navigating territory neither quite knew how to map. 3 weeks after the funeral, Thomas's brother arrived. Lillian was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the wagon. She straightened, hand on her aching back, and watched as Gerald Norris climbed down. He was 10 years older than Thomas had been, with the same narrow face but none of the warmth. He had not come to the funeral. Lillian. He nodded to her curtly. Need to speak with you about some matters. Frederick appeared from the barn, pitchfork still in hand. His eyes tracked Gerald with the same careful attention he gave half-broke horses. This is family business, Gerald said, glancing at Frederick with clear dismissal. Frederick is helping me run the farm, Lillian said. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of him. Gerald's mouth thinned. Fine. I will be direct. You cannot manage this land alone, especially not with a baby coming. I am prepared to buy it from you at a fair price. You can move into town, have an easier life. This land is not for sale. Be reasonable. What do you know about farming? Thomas did all the heavy work. You will lose everything by next winter if you try to hold on. I said no, Gerald. His expression hardened. That child you are carrying is a Norris. It deserves its inheritance, and I intend to make sure it gets proper care. If you will not sell voluntarily, I will petition the court for guardianship of the child and control of the estate." Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. "You cannot do that." "I can and I will. A woman alone in your condition, unable to properly manage her affairs. Any judge would see reason." He climbed back onto his wagon. "Think about my offer, Lillian. It would be better for everyone if we settled this quietly." He left, and Lillian stood frozen in the garden, her hands shaking. Frederick crossed to her in 3 long strides. "He is bluffing," Frederick said. "What if he is not? What if a judge agrees with him? Then we fight it. But you need a lawyer, someone who knows territorial law." "I cannot afford. I have some money saved. Not much, but enough." He touched her shoulder gently. "You are not losing this farm, Lillian. I promise you that." The next day they rode into Snake River together. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other buildings. The lawyer, a man named Samuel Peterson, had an office above the bank. He listened to their story, fingers steepled under his chin. "Gerald Norris has no legal standing for guardianship while you are living and competent," Peterson said. "However, he could make trouble. File challenges, drag things through court, cost you time and money." "What can we do?" Lillian asked. Peterson looked between her and Frederick. "The strongest defense would be to show the court you have stable support, a partner to help run the farm. If you were married, for instance, Gerald's case would collapse entirely." Lillian felt her face flush. "I am 6 months widowed." "I cannot possibly. I am just telling you the legal reality, Mrs. Norris. A woman with a husband and a working farm presents no grounds for concern. A widow alone with a newborn is vulnerable to exactly this kind of challenge." They left the office in silence. The ride home felt endless, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Finally, as they neared the farm, Lillian spoke. "I will not trap you into marriage, Frederick, not after everything. You would not be trapping me. You cannot possibly want." He pulled his horse to a stop and turned to face her. "Lillian, I need you to understand something. I loved you when we were 17 years old. I loved you when you chose Thomas. I loved you every day of the 11 years after. I rode through 3 days of rain to stand at his grave because I could not bear the thought of you facing that alone. So do not tell me what I want or do not want. I have been clear about that since the beginning." She stared at him, throat tight. "But I do not love you, not the way you deserve. I still miss Thomas. I still grieve him. It would not be fair." "I am not asking for fair. I am asking to stand beside you and help you raise your child and work this land. If that is all you ever give me, it will be enough." "That is not enough," she whispered. "You deserve someone who loves you completely." "Maybe, but I would rather have part of you than all of someone else." He held her gaze. "Think about it. No pressure. But if Gerald files papers, we will need to move fast." That night, Lillian lay awake on her bed, hands on her belly where the baby rolled and kicked. Thomas had been gone only a month. A month. How could she even consider marrying someone else so soon? What would people say? What would Thomas think? But then she remembered Gerald's cold eyes, his threat to take her child, and she knew she would do anything to prevent that. Even marry a man she was not in love with. Except that was not quite true, was it? Because when she pictured her future now, Frederick was in it. When she woke each morning, she listened for the sound of him moving around outside. When she made supper, she set 2 places without thinking, and when he looked at her with that steady, patient warmth, she felt something stir beneath the grief. Not love, not yet. But maybe the possibility of it, given time. She rose before dawn and found him already in the barn, tending the horses. "If we do this," she said without preamble, "it has to be real. I will not have a marriage in name only, not if we are trying to convince a court. But I need time, Frederick. Time to mourn Thomas properly. Time to know what I feel is real and not just gratitude or fear. He turned to face her, hope and caution warring in his expression. I can give you time. And if I never feel what you want me to feel, then we will still be partners, still be family. I will not resent you for being honest, Lillian. She took a shaky breath. Then yes, I will marry you. They wed 4 days later in the Snake River Church, with Samuel Peterson and his wife as witnesses. Lillian wore a simple blue dress, not black but not white either. Something in between that felt appropriate for a widow remarrying. Frederick wore his cleanest shirt and the same nervous expression he had worn when he was 17, and asked her father for permission to court her. The preacher kept the service brief. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Frederick kissed her cheek gently, as though she might shatter. They rode back to the farm in the wagon, sitting close together on the bench. The June sun was warm on their shoulders and wildflowers bloomed in the ditches. It should have felt wrong, Lillian thought. It should have felt like betrayal. Instead, it felt like relief. That evening she stood in the doorway of the bedroom, uncertain. Frederick solved the problem by grabbing his bedroll. I will sleep in the barn, he said. You are my husband now. You cannot sleep in the barn. I can and I will. You said you needed time, Lillian. That includes time to decide when and if you want me in your bed. Frederick, this is not up for discussion. His voice was firm but not unkind. I meant what I said. No pressure. We go at your pace. She watched him head out into the twilight, and something inside her shifted. Thomas had been a good husband in many ways, but patient had never been one of them. He had wanted what he wanted when he wanted it. Frederick was offering her something different: respect, space, the freedom to choose. 2 weeks after the wedding, Gerald filed his petition anyway. Samuel Peterson came to the farm to deliver the news. He is claiming the marriage was fraudulent, entered into solely to defeat his claim. The hearing is set for July 15th. Can he prove that? Frederick asked. He will try. If he can show the marriage is not genuine, he might convince a judge to set it aside. How do we prove it is genuine? Lillian asked. Peterson looked uncomfortable. You have to demonstrate it is a real marriage in every sense. That you live as husband and wife, that the relationship is legitimate. It may require testimony about, well, intimate matters. Lillian felt her face burn. Frederick's expression darkened. We are not airing our private business in a courtroom, Frederick said. Then you need to make sure there is no doubt in anyone's mind that this is a real marriage. Be seen together in town. Let people observe that you are a legitimate couple. And for God's sake, Mr. James, do not sleep in the barn where the neighbors might notice. After Peterson left, they sat at the kitchen table, both of them silent. I will move my things into the bedroom, Frederick said finally, but I will sleep on the floor. We can make it look right without— No. Lillian surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. If we are going to do this, we do it properly. You sleep in the bed, Frederick. It is large enough for both of us. Lillian, I trust you. And she realized as she said it that it was true. In all the weeks since Thomas's death, Frederick had never once pushed her, never demanded anything beyond what she could freely give. I trust you to respect the boundaries until I am ready. That night they lay side by side in the dark, a careful foot of space between them. Lillian could hear his breathing, slow and steady. The baby kicked and she gasped softly. You all right? Frederick asked immediately. Just the baby, getting stronger every day. A pause. Can I feel? She reached for his hand in the darkness and guided it to her belly. They waited, and then the baby rolled beneath his palm, a strong flutter of movement. She heard Frederick's breath catch. That is amazing, he whispered. Thomas never got to feel it this strong, Lillian said, and then immediately regretted the words. I am sorry. I should not have. You loved him. You miss him. I know that. Frederick's hand remained on her belly, warm and gentle. You do not have to hide your grief from me, Lillian. She turned toward him in the darkness, though she could barely see his face. I do not deserve your kindness. Stop saying that. You made a choice 11 years ago. It was the right choice for you at the time. Thomas was a good man and he made you happy. I do not resent that. Even though it meant you were alone all those years. I was not unhappy, just waiting. His thumb moved softly against her belly, following the baby's movements. Been good at waiting all my life. Few more months will not kill me. She felt something crack open inside her then, some wall she had built around her heart. She shifted closer, closing the space between them, and rested her head against his shoulder. He went very still. Lillian, just hold me, please. His arm came around her carefully, as though she were made of glass. They lay like that for a long time, her belly pressed against his side, his hand gentle in her hair. And for the first time since Thomas died, Lillian felt something other than grief. She felt safe. The hearing took place in the Snake River courthouse on a sweltering July afternoon. Gerald's lawyer was a sharp-faced man from Boise who spent an hour laying out his case. The marriage was suspiciously timed. Mrs. James, formerly Mrs. Norris, had been widowed only weeks before wedding Mr. James. Mr. James had no property of his own, suggesting he married for gain. The whole arrangement appeared designed to circumvent Mr. Gerald Norris's legitimate concern for his late brother's child. Samuel Peterson countered with testimony from neighbors who spoke of Frederick's constant presence at the farm, his hard work, the genuine care between him and Lillian. The preacher confirmed he had counseled them before the wedding and found their intentions sincere. Finally, Peterson called Frederick to the stand. Mr. James, what was your relationship with Lillian Norris before her first marriage? We courted for 2 years when we were younger. I wanted to marry her. She chose Thomas Norris instead. That must have caused bad feelings. It hurt, but I respected her choice. Why did you attend Thomas Norris's funeral? Frederick looked at Lillian, his expression steady. Because I knew she would need support, and I could not stay away knowing she was in pain. And why did you marry her? Because I never stopped loving her, and because I wanted to help her protect her home and her child. So you admit you married her partly for legal reasons. I married her because I have loved her for 13 years and I wanted to spend my life with her. The legal protection was a benefit, not the reason. Peterson nodded and dismissed him. Then he called Lillian. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, her belly prominent now at nearly 8 months. The judge, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, gestured for her to sit. Mrs. James, did you love your first husband? Very much. You still mourn him. Every day. Then why remarry so quickly? Lillian looked at Gerald, who sat with his arms crossed, then at Frederick, who watched her with quiet encouragement. Because my first husband is dead and my baby will be born in 2 months and I need help. But also because Frederick James is the most decent man I have ever known, and I am starting to believe that maybe grief and new love can exist in the same heart. Maybe honoring the dead does not mean refusing to live. The courtroom was silent. The judge studied her for a long moment. Is this a real marriage, Mrs. James? Are you and Mr. James truly husband and wife in every sense? She felt her face heat, but she held his gaze. Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded and dismissed her. After closing arguments, he retired to his chambers. 20 minutes later, he returned. I find no evidence of fraud, he said. Mrs. James has remarried legitimately, and her new husband appears more than capable of managing the property and providing for the child. Mr. Gerald Norris's petition is denied. Lillian felt her knees go weak with relief. Frederick caught her arm, steadying her. Outside the courthouse, Gerald confronted them on the steps. "This is not over," he said coldly. "That child is a Norris. I will not let some drifter raise my brother's blood." "Then you should have been a better uncle," Frederick said quietly. "You should have offered help instead of threats. Now you have nothing. Leave us alone, Gerald, or next time we will file charges for harassment." Gerald glared at them but left without another word. That night back at the farm, Lillian stood at the stove making supper while Frederick washed up at the basin. The evening light slanted through the windows, turning everything golden. She felt the baby shift inside her, a slow roll that made her press her hand to her side. "You all right?" Frederick asked, drying his hands. "Just thinking about what I said in court about grief and new love." She turned to face him. "I meant it, Frederick. I do not know exactly what I feel yet, but it is something real." He crossed to her slowly, giving her time to step away if she wanted. When she did not move, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We have time to figure it out." "Do we?" She looked down at her belly. "Baby will be here soon. Life is going to get complicated." "Life is already complicated." He smiled, that rare soft smile that lit his whole face. "But we will manage. We always do." She rose on her toes and kissed him, quick and gentle. He froze, then carefully kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her face. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright. "What was that for?" he asked, voice rough. "For being patient, for being you," she smiled. "And because I wanted to." "You can do that whenever you want," he said seriously. "Just so you know." She laughed, and it felt good, felt like something breaking open inside her chest. They ate supper together, talking about plans for the harvest, about names for the baby, about the future that was opening up before them. And when they went to bed that night, Lillian curled against Frederick's side naturally, no hesitation, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her. "Frederick," she whispered in the darkness. "Yeah, I think I am falling in love with you." His arm tightened around her. "You do not have to say that, I know, but it is true." She tilted her head up, trying to see his face. "It is different from what I felt for Thomas. Quieter, maybe. But it is real." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then found her mouth in the dark. This kiss was different from before, deeper, more certain. She felt heat spread through her despite the awkwardness of her belly between them. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I will love you until the day I die, Lillian James." "I know," she whispered. "I am starting to understand that." They made love for the first time that night, slow and careful and sweet. Frederick treated her like she was precious, like she might break, his hands gentle on her skin, his voice murmuring reassurances. And when it was over, Lillian lay in his arms and cried, not from sadness but from relief. Relief that she could feel this way again. Relief that moving forward did not mean forgetting the past. Relief that Frederick loved her enough to let her do both. 2 months later, on a cool September morning, Lillian went into labor. Frederick rode for the midwife and made it back in record time. The older woman barely settled before the baby started coming in earnest. It was a long labor, hours of pain that left Lillian exhausted and terrified. But Frederick stayed beside her the whole time, letting her grip his hand until she thought she might break his fingers, wiping her face with a cool cloth, telling her she was strong. She could do this, just a little more. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, the baby came. A girl, healthy and screaming, with a tuft of dark hair and Thomas's nose. "Margaret," Lillian gasped, cradling the baby against her chest. "Her name is Margaret." Frederick leaned over them both, his expression awed. "She is perfect. She looks like him." Lillian felt tears stream down her face. "She looks like Thomas. She looks like you too." Frederick touched one tiny fist with his finger, and Margaret's hand closed around it reflexively. She is going to be beautiful and strong just like her mama. The midwife cleaned up and left them alone with instructions to call if there were any problems. Frederick carried the baby while Lillian slept, walking the floor of the cabin, humming tunelessly. When Lillian woke, she found him sitting in the rocking chair with Margaret asleep on his chest, both of them peaceful. "You are a natural," she said softly. He looked up and gave her that slow smile. "She is pretty easy to love, Frederick." She held out her hand and he came to sit on the edge of the bed, still holding the baby. "I want you to know something. You are her father in every way that matters. Thomas gave her life, but you are going to raise her. You are going to teach her and protect her and love her. That makes you her papa." His eyes went bright with unshed tears. "You mean that?" "I do, completely." He leaned forward and kissed her softly. "Then we are a family." "We are a family," she agreed. The first year of Margaret's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless work. The farm flourished under Frederick's careful management. He proved to have a gift for breeding horses, and word spread quickly. Soon ranchers from all over the territory were bringing their mares to be bred to his stallion, paying good money for the service. The debts to the general store disappeared. The barn got a new roof. They added a room onto the cabin. Lillian found herself falling deeper in love with her husband every day. She loved the way he made Margaret laugh, bouncing her on his knee and making silly faces. She loved how he brought her coffee in the morning before she was fully awake. She loved the feel of his arms around her at night, strong and safe. She loved the life they were building together. One evening in late summer, as Margaret took her wobbly first steps across the yard, reaching for Frederick's outstretched hands, Lillian stood on the porch and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked her down. The baby shrieked with delight as Frederick caught her and swung her up, and the sound of their combined laughter filled the air. This was joy, she thought. Real, complicated, hard-won joy. Not the simple happiness of her first marriage, but something richer. Something that knew loss and chose love anyway. "Look at that," Frederick called to her. "Did you see? She walked 5 whole steps." "I saw," Lillian called back, laughing. "Our girl is growing up." Frederick carried Margaret back to the porch and handed her to Lillian, then sat down on the step beside them. His hand found hers, their fingers lacing together naturally. Margaret babbled and grabbed at their joined hands, trying to pull them apart so she could hold both at once. "She is greedy," Frederick said, amused, "wants all the attention. She gets it from me." Lillian leaned against his shoulder, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, the mountains purple in the distance. "Frederick, I am happy. Really, truly happy." He turned his head to kiss her temple. "Good, you deserve to be, so do you. I am, trust me." He squeezed her hand. "Got everything I ever wanted right here." That autumn, Lillian realized she was pregnant again. She told Frederick one evening after putting Margaret to bed, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "Really?" His whole expression lit up. "You are sure?" "Pretty sure. I feel the same way I did with Margaret." He crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around. "Another baby, our baby. Our baby, not hers and Thomas's, hers and Frederick's, their own child to complete their family. Are you happy?" she asked. "Happy, Lillian, I am over the moon." He set her down carefully, then dropped to his knees and pressed his face to her still flat belly. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I cannot wait to meet you." She ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man. "I love you, Frederick James. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." He looked up at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you too. Every single day more than the day before." The pregnancy was easier than the first, maybe because Lillian was not grieving, not stressed, not alone. Frederick doted on her shamelessly, bringing her flowers from the meadow, rubbing her swollen feet, taking over all the heavy work without complaint. Margaret, now a toddling, chattering whirlwind, seemed fascinated by her mother's growing belly, pressing her ear against it and giggling when the baby kicked. In May of 1878, on a warm spring morning full of birdsong, Lillian gave birth to a son. The labor was faster this time, and by noon she was holding a red-faced, squalling baby boy with Frederick's strong jaw and her dark hair. "Owen," Frederick said, touching one tiny fist, "if that is still all right with you." "Owen James," Lillian agreed. "It is perfect." Margaret was allowed to meet her brother that evening. She approached cautiously, eyes wide, and touched his hand with one gentle finger. "Baby," she announced solemnly. "That is right, sweet girl. Your baby brother." Frederick scooped her up so she could see better. "You are going to help Mama and me take care of him, right?" "Help," Margaret agreed seriously. That night, with both children finally asleep, Frederick and Lillian lay tangled together in their bed. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. "2 years ago, I was standing at Thomas's grave thinking my life was over," she said quietly. "Now look at us. 2 children, a thriving farm, a future." "You saved yourself," Frederick said. "I just helped a little." "You did more than help. You gave me a reason to keep going. You showed me what real love looks like." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Patient, steady, undemanding love that just keeps showing up. That is the only kind of love worth having." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch infinitely gentle. "The flashy stuff burns out quick, but this lasts." "This lasts," she agreed. They made love then, slow and tender, relearning each other after months of waiting. And later, as Frederick slept beside her, and the baby stirred in his cradle and moonlight spilled through the window, Lillian thought about the woman she had been at Thomas's grave. That woman had been broken, lost, drowning in grief. She had needed saving. But the woman she was now had been forged through that grief into something stronger. She had learned that the heart was big enough to hold both sorrow and joy, both memory and new love. She had learned that moving forward was not betrayal but survival. And she had learned that sometimes the love you need is not the love you expect, but the love that waits quietly in the rain, asking nothing, offering everything. Frederick had been that love for her. And now, every day, she tried to be that love for him in return. The years rolled on, and the farm grew prosperous. Frederick's reputation as a horse breaker spread across Idaho territory and beyond. Margaret grew into a bright, fearless girl who could ride before she could read properly. Owen inherited his father's quiet steadiness and his mother's determination. They added a 3rd child, a 2nd daughter named Clara, and then a 4th, another son they called Daniel. The cabin expanded into a proper house. The barn became a stable with 20 stalls. They hired hands to help with the work, and Frederick trained them in his gentle methods with horses. Lillian started a small business selling eggs and butter in town, and then expanded to selling vegetables from their increasingly large garden. The land that Thomas had claimed and struggled to prove became a legacy for their children. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Lillian would walk to the small family plot beyond the north pasture where Thomas was buried. She would stand at his grave and tell him about his daughter, about how smart and beautiful Margaret was becoming, about the life Lillian had built with Frederick. She told him she was happy and hoped he would approve. She thanked him for the years they had shared and the child they had made together. And then she would walk back to the house where Frederick waited on the porch, where their children played in the yard, where laughter and love filled every corner. She would take her husband's hand and lean against his shoulder, and together they would watch the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in impossible colors. "What were you thinking about?" Frederick asked one such evening when the children were older and the house was finally quiet. "Just how strange life is, how you can lose everything and find something even better, how the worst day of your life can lead to the best years. Do you regret anything?" She considered the question seriously. "I regret that Thomas died so young. I regret that Margaret never knew her father. But I do not regret anything that came after. I do not regret us." "Good." He pulled her closer. "Because I would not change a single thing, not even the years of waiting. They led me here to you, to this life. That makes every lonely night worth it." She turned in his arms and kissed him, deep and thorough, with all the love she had learned to feel for this patient, steady man who had stood beside her in the rain and never asked for anything in return. When they broke apart, he was smiling that soft smile that still made her heart skip. "What was that for? For waiting, for loving me even when I could not love you back, for giving me time to find my way to you." "I would wait another 13 years if I had to," he said seriously. "You are worth any amount of waiting, Lillian James. Well, you do not have to wait any more." She took his hand and placed it over her heart. "I am yours, Frederick, completely and forever. No more grief between us, no more guilt. Just love." "Just love," he agreed. They stood together as darkness fell and stars emerged one by one in the vast Idaho sky. In the house behind them, their children slept safe and warm. Around them, the land they had built together stretched out in all directions, fertile and productive and theirs. And between them, earned through pain and patience and time, was a love that had survived loss and doubt and fear to become something unshakable. Years later, when Margaret was grown and married with children of her own, she asked her mother what made a marriage work. They were sitting on the porch of the old house, watching Owen and Clara and Daniel help Frederick with the horses, and Lillian thought carefully before answering. "The right partner," she said finally. "Not necessarily the one you think you want when you are young, but the one who shows up when it matters. The one who asks nothing and gives everything. The one who loves you on your worst days just as much as your best ones." "Like Papa," Margaret said. "Like your Papa," Lillian agreed. She watched her husband across the yard, his hair gray now but his movements still sure and strong. He felt her gaze and looked up, giving her that same steady smile he had given her at Thomas's grave all those years ago. Her heart swelled with love so fierce it hurt. "He saved me, you know. When I thought I had nothing left to live for, he showed me I had everything, and then he waited, patient as sunrise, until I was ready to see it too." "That is real love," Margaret said softly. "That is the only kind that lasts," Lillian replied. Frederick started back toward the house, and Lillian rose to meet him. He caught her hand as he always did, their fingers lacing together with the ease of decades of practice. And as they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, Lillian thought about that young woman who had wept at her husband's grave in the rain. She would not recognize the life that woman had found. She would not believe that so much joy could grow from so much pain, but it had. Love had found her in the rain, standing silent and steadfast beside her. It had waited while she grieved, asked nothing while she healed, and then given her a second chance at happiness more profound than anything she could have imagined. She had been saved by patience, by devotion, by a man who loved her enough to let her find her own way home to his heart. And every day since, she had worked to deserve that gift, to honor it, to return it measure for measure. That was what real love looked like. Not the passionate, impulsive love of youth, but the deep, enduring love that weathered storms and grew stronger for it. The love that stood beside you in the rain and never left, no matter how long the wait, no matter how dark the night. That was the love she had found with Frederick James. And it was more than enough. It was everything. The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and Frederick squeezed her hand gently. No words were needed. After so many years together, they spoke in glances and touches, in the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. Inside the house, their grandchildren were visiting, their laughter ringing through the rooms. Tomorrow there would be work to do, horses to train, crops to tend, life to live. But tonight, in this perfect moment, there was only peace, only gratitude, only love that had waited in the rain and found its way home at last. Lillian leaned against her husband's shoulder and smiled. This was her happily ever after. Hard-won, complicated, built on loss and patience and time. But real. So beautifully, perfectly real. And it had been worth every tear, every doubt, every moment of fear. Because in the end, love had found her, and she had found herself. And together, she and Frederick had built something that would last long after they were gone, something their children and grandchildren would carry forward. A legacy of love that had started with two young people who cared for each other, had survived 11 years of separation, and had finally found its way home in the rain at a graveside in Snake River, Idaho. That was where their forever had begun. Standing in the mud and the rain, grief-stricken and lost, with one man's quiet presence promising that she would not face the darkness alone. And she never had. Not for a single day since.